Have you ever stopped to think about how normal childbirth seems today? Hospitals, doctors, pain relief, clean rooms, and machines that can monitor both mother and baby have made one of life's most dangerous moments much safer than it once was. But for almost all of human history, none of those things existed. There were no operating rooms, no antibiotics, no emergency surgeries. Just a woman, the people around her, and whatever knowledge had been passed down through countless generations. So, how did ancient women survive giving birth? And perhaps an even bigger question, how did our species survive at all if childbirth was so incredibly risky? The answer takes us deep into the story of your ancestors, revealing that every person alive today exists because millions of mothers somehow overcame one of evolution's greatest challenges. The problem began long before humans built villages or discovered farming. It started when our ancestors stood up and began walking on two legs. At first glance, walking upright seems like one of humanity's greatest advantages. It freed our hands, allowed us to travel farther, and changed the course of evolution forever. But it also quietly created a problem that would affect every generation that followed. As our ancestors evolved to walk efficiently, the shape of the pelvis changed. A narrower pelvis helped make walking and running more stable. Then, another evolutionary change arrived. Human brains began growing larger. Over millions of years, babies developed increasingly bigger heads to house those expanding brains. These two trends collided in a way that scientists sometimes call the obstetric dilemma. Mothers needed a pelvis designed for walking, while babies needed a birth canal large enough for their growing heads. Unlike many other mammals, human babies cannot simply slide straight through the birth canal. Modern research shows that during birth, a baby's head must twist and rotate several times to fit through the mother's pelvis. It's an incredibly complicated journey that rarely happens in a straight line. Even today, doctors carefully monitor these rotations because problems can quickly become dangerous. But that wasn't the whole story. Scientists studying fossils noticed something surprising. Although early human relatives like Australopithecus had smaller brains than modern humans, their pelvises were already adapting for upright walking. Later species, including Homo erectus, developed even larger brains while continuing to travel long distances on foot. Childbirth was becoming more difficult long before modern humans appeared. This raises another question. If birth was becoming harder, why didn't evolution simply produce babies with smaller heads? The answer lies inside your own brain. A larger brain allowed our ancestors to solve problems, make better tools, cooperate with one another, and eventually reshape the world itself. Those advantages were enormous. Evolution wasn't aiming for an easy birth. It was balancing two competing needs: intelligence and mobility. Childbirth became the price our species paid for both. Then archaeologists discovered something equally remarkable. Human babies are born far more helpless than the young of most other mammals. A newborn deer can stand within hours. A newborn chimpanzee clings tightly to its mother almost immediately. Human babies can't even support their own heads. For a long time, scientists wondered why. One explanation is that babies are born earlier in their development than they otherwise would be, because waiting longer would make their heads too large to pass safely through the birth canal. In a sense, human babies finish much of their brain development outside the womb. That means childbirth happens before development is complete. The result is months, even years, of complete dependence. And that dependence may have changed human society forever. Imagine a small group of hunter-gatherers, tens of thousands of years ago. A woman has just given birth. She can't immediately return to gathering food or traveling long distances. Her baby requires constant feeding, carrying, and protection. One adult alone would struggle. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities noticed something fascinating. Mothers are rarely raising children by themselves. Grandmothers, older siblings, fathers, aunts, uncles, and unrelated members of the group often help care for infants. Researchers call this cooperative breeding, and many believe it became one of humanity's greatest survival strategies. In other words, Ancient women may have survived childbirth not because they were alone and exceptionally strong, but because they almost never faced it alone. The evidence doesn't come from written records, since childbirth left few direct traces. Instead, it comes from studying living traditional societies, skeletal remains, and the unique biology of our species. Again and again, these clues point toward cooperation rather than isolation. But even with help, childbirth remained dangerous. Without antibiotics, a small infection could become deadly. Without blood transfusions, severe bleeding often meant there was little anyone could do. A baby positioned the wrong way could threaten both lives. Today, doctors solve many of these problems with surgery. Ancient communities had only experience, patience, and hope. Yet they also possessed knowledge that shouldn't be underestimated. Across cultures separated by thousands of miles, traditional birth attendants developed practical techniques through generations of observation. They knew comfortable birth positions. They recognized signs that labor was progressing normally. They understood the value of warmth, hydration, massage, and emotional reassurance. Some communities preferred squatting births, while others used ropes, wooden supports, or the assistance of another woman to make pushing more effective. Interestingly, many of these positions are now being reconsidered in modern medicine. Research suggests that upright positions can sometimes widen parts of the pelvis slightly and allow gravity to assist labor. Ancient practices weren't based on anatomy textbooks, but many emerged from centuries of careful experience. Then, scientists uncovered another clue hidden inside human bones. Women's pelvises are not identical. They vary naturally in shape and size. Some are slightly wider, others have differently angled openings. Evolution preserved this variation because there isn't one perfect pelvis. A shape that's excellent for childbirth might be less efficient for long-distance walking, while another might favor movement but make labor more difficult. Your body still reflects this evolutionary compromise. Even hormones play an important role. During pregnancy, hormones such as relaxin help loosen ligaments around the pelvis. This doesn't dramatically separate the bones, as many people imagine, but it does allow a small amount of additional flexibility during birth. That tiny change can make a meaningful difference when every millimeter matters. But perhaps the biggest surprise came from ancient DNA and fossil studies. For years, many researchers assumed childbirth became dramatically harder only after agriculture began. Farming changed diets, body size, and health. While agriculture certainly introduced new challenges, evidence suggests difficult childbirth is much older than farming itself. It has been part of the human story for hundreds of thousands of years. That realization changes how we see our ancestors. It's easy to picture prehistoric people as constantly losing the battle against nature. But if childbirth had been impossible, none of us would be here. The overwhelming majority of births throughout history succeeded. Families grew, communities survived, generations continued. Of course, tragedy was also common. Archaeologists occasionally uncover skeletons showing heartbreaking evidence of mothers and unborn babies who died together during obstructed labor. These discoveries remind us that childbirth carried real risks, yet they also highlight something remarkable. Despite those dangers, enough mothers survived, generation after generation, to carry humanity through ice ages, droughts, volcanic eruptions, migrations, and changing climates. Every branch of your family tree stretches back through an unbroken chain of women who gave birth successfully. Think about how unlikely that really is. One failed birth anywhere along that chain, thousands of generations ago, and your story would never begin. Researchers studying maternal mortality estimate that before modern medicine, the lifetime risk of dying from pregnancy or childbirth was dramatically higher than it is today. Different populations experience different levels of risk depending on nutrition, disease, and living conditions. But childbirth remained one of the greatest dangers women faced. And still, humanity expanded across every continent except Antarctica. How? Part of the answer is biology. Part is culture. Our ancestors didn't simply evolve larger brains. They evolved larger social networks. Knowledge about pregnancy was passed from one generation of women to the next. Communities learned which foods supported recovery, how to comfort laboring mothers, and how to care for newborns. These traditions became as important as stone tools or fire. Some anthropologists even argue that the need to protect vulnerable mothers and infants helped strengthen long-term family bonds. A child who required years of care encouraged cooperation between parents, relatives, and the wider group. In a way, the challenges of childbirth may have shaped not only our bodies, but also our compassion. That idea becomes even more powerful when we look at modern humans. Your species dominates the planet because people learned to solve problems together. That habit didn't begin with cities or civilizations. It may have begun around countless ancient campfires, where women supported one another through the hardest hours of their lives, while families waited for the cry of a newborn. The arrival of modern medicine has transformed childbirth in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. Cesarean sections, sterile equipment, blood transfusions, antibiotics, and skilled medical teams now save millions of lives every year. These advances represent one of humanity's greatest achievements, but they also make it easy to forget the story that came before. The next time you see a newborn sleeping peacefully, it's worth remembering that this simple moment carries millions of years of evolutionary history. Hidden behind every birth is a delicate balance between walking upright and growing larger brains. Hidden behind every family is an ancient tradition of people caring for one another when survival depended on it. So the real answer to how ancient women survived childbirth isn't just that they were tougher than we are today. It's that evolution shaped extraordinary bodies, communities built extraordinary knowledge, and generations of mothers passed both on to their daughters. Every one of us is living proof that despite impossible odds, they succeeded. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of all. Childbirth isn't just how new life begins. It may be one of the oldest reasons humans learned that surviving together is stronger than surviving alone. Once you see it that way, you'll never think of birth as just another ordinary moment again.